How do we manage family and friends who tell us we're going to hell if we don't think, feel the same way they do on any particular subject? And, this is really interesting. It's hard. And even if they're not thinking you're going to hell, we can have serious disagreements about things, politics or religion or sexuality. And it is so hard for us to get along with people who see things very differently than we do. And we naturally put up our defenses. And we find if we're at Thanksgiving meal, we decide we don't want to ever eat Thanksgiving again at that person's house. I've known parents who wouldn't talk to their children and children who wouldn't talk to their parents because they seriously disagree about issues. And so here's the answer, I think.
Welcome to another episode of Making Sense of Faith with Adam Hamilton. This week's episode comes from an event Adam hosted called A Conversation with Pastor Adam, where he answered questions from the audience. In this episode, Adam addresses, did Jesus know that Judas was going to betray him? And how do we handle friends and family that we disagree with on issues that are really important to us? This episode isn't about having all the answers. It's about leaning into the big, hard questions on the journey of making sense of faith. Here's Adam.
So the question was, did Jesus know that Judas was going to betray him when he called him to his disciple? Did Jesus call him anticipating that Judas would sell him out for 30 pieces of silver so that he would die? Which leads to some other deeper questions like, did Jesus know he was going to die at the age of 33 from the time he was a kid or when he called his disciples? He certainly seems to have known that it was likely he was going to die. But was it clear to him that Judas was the one who was going to betray him? And you say, well, Jesus knows everything. Well, when did he come to know everything? Did he know everything when he was a baby? Have you ever seen those paintings of Jesus in the manger and he looks like he has all the knowledge in the world in his eyes, like he already knows everything? Did Jesus have to learn to talk? Did he have to learn to walk, or did he walk from the moment he was a baby, or he had muscles enough to do it? Could he speak all the languages of the world when he was 6 months old, or just a few of them, or maybe none of them yet? Right? And so when we look at, we believe that God became flesh in Jesus, but in Philippians, Paul's letter to the Philippians, he says, but God emptied himself of Jesus emptied himself of his divinity to become human. So at some point, he continues to gain knowledge, insight, understanding, but I don't know whether Jesus knew when he called Judas that he was going to betray him. Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. But along the way, he puts Judas in charge of the money. And one of the Gospels tells us that Judas would help himself to the money from time to time. Why did Judas begin following Jesus? That's one of the really big questions, right? And I love Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell both try to, address this. And it appears as though Judas, was somebody who really wanted to get rid of the Romans. And he was expecting the Messiah to lead an army to get rid of them. And Jesus was a major disappointment to him because he kept talking about loving your enemies and turning the other cheek. And when he came to Jerusalem and Judas is thinking, now finally he's going to raise up the army, and instead he doesn't do it, then it looks like Judas decided at that moment, I've had enough. I've wasted 3 years of my life with this guy. I actually love him, but right now I just can't stand him. And for whatever reason, the scripture says the devil put it in his heart, but he sells Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver and betrays him at the very last. And Jesus by this time knows it's going to happen. Jesus knows people's hearts. He knows it's going to happen. So when I look at this, I don't think that Jesus, so here was part of the question. If this was necessary all along, then, why does the scripture take such a hard look at Judas? Why does the scripture take, just speak about Judas in pretty negative terms? And though he fulfills an important part of God's plan, it could have been fulfilled some other way if Judas had remained faithful. And so, but interestingly enough, in the scriptures, it really doesn't take a terribly, Jesus says a harsh thing to him here or there, but at the very end, but even then Jesus shares his bread with him at the Last Supper and has him sit right next to him. Right. And the question I always ask, and I preached a sermon on this once, is, Judas goes after he sees that Jesus is arrested and he knows he's going to die. Judas feels great regret and he throws the 30 pieces of silver back to the priests. And then he goes out in a field, and at least one of the accounts, he hangs himself. In another one, he his bowels burst forward, and you can try to make those say the same thing. But in any case, Judas feels great regret. And the question I always think about is, what would have happened if Judas had waited 3 days? If he just waited 3 days from that moment of the darkest moment of his life, where he feels such overwhelming guilt and sorrow, what if he just waited 3 days, just actually from Friday to Sunday, 36 hours? Don't you think if he'd waited 36 hours and he saw the risen Christ and he threw himself at Jesus' feet and said, Jesus, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. What do you think Jesus would have done? I think he would have forgiven him too. Can you imagine the testimony Judas would have had traveling around the world and say, I sold him out for 30 pieces of silver. I was the one who put him on the cross, and he forgave even me. Right? Anyway, I just find it an interesting thought question, but I think Jesus was aware going into the cross, or going into Jerusalem, what Judas was going to do. He knew he was stealing money from the common purse, and I think he still loved Judas. I think he still loved him to the end. How do we manage family and friends who tell us we're going to hell if we don't feel the same way they do on any particular subject? And, this is really interesting. It's hard. And even if they're not thinking you're going to hell, we can have serious disagreements about things, politics or religion or sexuality. And it is so hard for us to get along with people who see things very differently than we do. And we naturally put up our defenses. And we find if we're at Thanksgiving meal, we decide we don't want to ever eat Thanksgiving again at that person's house. I've known parents who wouldn't talk to their children, and children who wouldn't talk to their parents because they seriously disagree about issues. And so here's the answer, I think, is Jesus told us to love our enemies. Now, the thing is, the person who sees things differently on human sexuality or Black Lives Matter or whatever, they're not your enemy. They're your fellow humans, right? But even if they were your enemy, you're called to love them. And I don't see any way out of the current morass we're in than somehow looking at people and trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and trying to love them, even if you disagree. And you don't have to give in on what you believe, but you do have to say, but I care about you, even if we disagree. And sometimes our feelings get hurt. I maybe told you this last week. Lavon received a letter from a 40-year friend of ours. And we weren't that close, but she said, I'm not going to be your friend anymore because of what Adam and Church of the Resurrection teach about LGBTQ people and welcoming everybody. And so I feel like I have to separate myself from the evil. That's what she said. We were the evil that they have to be separated from, and I think the other term was, you're a cancer, and we need to separate ourselves from the cancer. I'm like, whoa, seriously? So this is what humans tend to do to each other. And so we have to decide, how do I respond to that? And the way we respond to that is say, we're really sorry you feel that way, but we still love you. We disagree, but we still love you. And I think this was Dr. King, when at one of his sermons in the book Strength to Love was so powerful when he says, you can, and I'm paraphrasing, you can attack our children and we're still going to love you. You can bomb our homes and we're still going to love you. But we're going to wear you down by our capacity to love. And one day we're going to win a double victory as you come to accept that love and come to love as well. And so I don't know any other answers to where we're at, but when that happens, it's hurtful. You got to acknowledge that too. I remember years ago, I preached a sermon. This is it was in 2004. And I preached a sermon that upset a lot of people around human sexuality and just trying to say, I see this differently than I used to see it. And I could be wrong, but this is, we're going to be a church that's going to welcome people. And we're going to love them. And you don't all have to agree with me. It's okay. But when I read scripture, this is the bigger message of scripture that I see. And I've met with a lot of these folks and I care about them and I want to be their pastor. I want this to be their church family. And I think there were 800 people who left the church in the 8 months after that. And I have never experienced something so painful personally. And that was, Lavon said, well, imagine what it's like to be somebody in their families who's gay or lesbian. I mean, you're just getting emails from people leaving the church. And so anyway, and I remember thinking, I shared this with some of you before, but I remember after about 6 months of being deeply depressed, and I don't get depressed very often. And every day I'd wake up and I'd pray, God, did I get this wrong? Did I misunderstand you? Please forgive me if I did. But, I just don't, I think you love these people. And it's not only that you love them, but I think you understand, and again, as a church, we have 70-30. We're divided on gay marriage and some other things, but generally we've said, but we're going to love everybody. And I think most people want to love everybody. Even if they're more conservative on this, I think they say we want to love everybody. But, at that time I'm like, maybe I shouldn't be the pastor here anymore. So we live out in Stillwell, and we have a barn, an old barn built in the 1800s. And we had a couple horses at that time. And I remember I was out in the barn, and at this time I'm getting job offers from other places. Come be the president of the seminary, or come do this, or come here and you'll make a lot more money, and all this kind of stuff. And we're out mucking out the stalls. We had these 2 horses, and we're cleaning them out before we put the horses in. And it was probably 9 o'clock at night, I'm guessing. It was very cold, maybe in the 20s. And I turned to LaVon, I said, would you be okay if I took another job? And she said, well, tell me more. And I said, my heart hurts too much to stay for 25 more years this. And, are you okay if we do something else? And she said, well, of course, if you feel God's leading you to go somewhere else or do something else, that's fine. I just have one question I want to ask you. Is God calling you to leave, or are you running away? Man, I hate it when she asks questions like that. And part of what I realized was that I was running away, and I didn't feel like God had called me to leave. And so I stayed, and, 4 or 5 months later, I began to find my joy again, in what I was doing. And almost all the best experiences I've had in ministry have been since that moment, and I would have missed out on all of them had I left in 2004. That's a word for many of you, because some of you feel like quitting or leaving right now. Family, or your jobs, or your church, or something else. And there are times where all of us go through moments like that. And to be able to go, is God calling me to leave, or am I running away? And for most of the time, I think God is not calling us to leave, and we hang in there. And then we see what God does after that. So anyway, how did I get there? I don't even remember which question I was trying to answer. How do you deal with family or people who think this about you? And I think the answer is that you love them.
Thanks for tuning in to Making Sense of Faith with Adam Hamilton. Do you know someone wrestling with life's biggest questions? Share this episode with them, because the more people willing to embrace the hard questions, the better. Do you want to go deeper? You can visit makingsenseoffaith.com to find the show notes and additional resources. That's also where you can sign up to get the notes and resources delivered straight to your inbox. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe and leave us a rating in your podcast player. That'll make sure that you get the latest episodes and help others find the podcast. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that notification bell to catch future episodes and videos there. Until next time, remember that your questions matter. Doubts are normal, and making sense of faith is a lifelong journey. We'll see you on the next episode of Making Sense of Faith.